Originally somebody inside of, the Apple ecosystem said, we really want to understand what it would take to actually reshore something. We want to know how hard it is. And we'll talk, the subject matter that you guys wanted to discuss was like, how do you do it? How do you accelerate it? I'll tell you kind of the story of what they went through. And they have unlimited resources and incredibly smart people. If you think that they're smart, if you haven't had the opportunity to work with them, brace yourself. But they went on this journey and said, let's figure out if this is feasible. And they looked at their product portfolio and said, all right, what is going to be, lower risk? You could never have even pitched the idea of the phone. At that point in the time, the phone was selling more units in one day, and I don't know the figures, but Gartner does. They were selling more of those phones in one day than the entire year of the desktop. And it wasn't to say that the desktop didn't sell well. That was to say that the phone was just incredibly high volume. And so they picked one and they said, okay, well, we've got to figure out the supply chain first. And I think somebody from manufacturing ops probably said, no, you've got to figure out manufacturing ops first. And then somebody from test said, do we even know how to make fixtures in the Americas anymore? So they had to go figure it all out. Mm-hmm. What people do when they're trying to go onshore, the smart thing to do is to either hire a partner, so a contract manufacturer that has a footprint in the Americas, and that short circuits half of it, right? Because they know the process, the tooling, the supply chain, the trade routes. They've already kind of got that stuff. And I think that, I don't know what Tim's long game is, but I don't think that they wanted to stand up another factory, right? I don't think that they wanted to own that. It's a huge pain to manage, right? So I think that they really wanted to be experts in managing supply chain and supplier management. So they partnered with a world-class contract manufacturer. And they said, okay, you guys know how to do this manufacturing process. You don't exactly know our manufacturing process, but we're going to come teach you. And somewhere in the middle, we'll find a happy medium. And it was good and very, very painful. And I'll tell you why it was painful was because they were so used to working in China, and the workforce is very different between China and Texas. So the first thing was, figuring out what the labor model would support. And so we knew basically it was a spreadsheet exercise that to be cost competitive, we had to reduce this percentage of the labor. And it was at the time, it was a comically high percentage. It was like, that's not possible. And as a team, both the customer and the service provider side, we said, this is where we have to get to. And we have to mechanize a ridiculously high percentage. And we set off and made multiple work streams to do this. And it took us about a year. And it was a really interesting project in that we stood up a factory. We brought in engineers. I had an army of folks. There were 500 people hired for this. And nobody knew what was going on. Like there was like skunk works turned up to 11. The level of secrecy that those guys are able to maintain is unlike anything I had ever seen before. And I think I had like a personal NDA that, I'm not allowed to talk about. This was years ago, so I can talk about it now. But they kind of said, don't tell anyone. And ultimately, the slip up came from a planning and zoning official who was approving the inspection, and they put it on a memo who it was going to be to support. And so that's how the world found out that Apple was trying their hand at U.S. manufacturing again. So that was kind of the story of how you got there. They micromanaged the supply chain really tightly. They had preferred vendors, but part of it was figuring out, now I can't just import everything from Asia and then have you do the final assembly. Some companies have done this and they got a little bit of hot water, right? So the assembled in the USA versus made in the USA debate that kind of raged on for a little while. But these guys, they took it serious. The circuit boards were assembled there, so it wasn't an issue like where you're opening up a box of circuit boards every day and putting them in the check. No, they were doing the PCBAs on site at very high volume. Functional tests, burn-in testing of the boards before they would ever go into a chassis. And I can't divulge this, but they put their machines through a higher level of burn-in and testing than I think most people would have imagined. But they're brutal, so I think that's why their initial quality is very, very high. But we mechanized that whole thing, right? So if you looked at manufacturing, we use the term of value add and non-value add all the time. Mm-hmm. They said anything that's NVA, anything that's not value add to this, like you have to mechanize it. It's the only way we make this work. And they had this philosophy that was unique to them. And I've seen other companies try to emulate it, but they don't quite get it. And if you told them that can't be done, they would say, is it can't be done because it's hard or because physics say it is impossible? And if it's physics, please bring me the math. And like I love this Reddit sub, they did the math. Like you'd have to prove to them in either a DOE or with, real analysis behind it that something couldn't be done. They just don't have this culture of no. And it forced us. This is what I told you, it was like the hardest job I'd ever done. It's like, why can't you mechanize this? It's really hard. It's really expensive. They don't care. Like, prove that it can't be done. And it forced us to stretch. We had never mechanized something that much before. And so it ended up being like the flagship kind of deployment. And in the end, very tough. But I have long since been away from this, but I know that the next generation rolled out a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and it stayed in Texas. I was really, really excited to hear that the next generation product stayed there too. So that became a world-class example of reshoring. Now, from a scale perspective, that is a drop in the ocean compared to what it would take to kind of bring back their phone business. Mm-hmm. But it encourages me that maybe someday we'll see local for local. If we can drive the cost of automation down and make it simpler and easy to scale to multiple geos, someday we can recognize the vision of local for local, which ultimately everybody wants. Right now, we just can't do it, right? If you have a $500 piece of consumer electronics and it uses a $150,000 tester to validate that it works, you can't put one of those testers in 20 locations. Just no. That's the thing that we're up against.